Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and today on my channel about Norse language and myth, I want to talk to you about how the language that we know as Old Norse, the language of the Viking Age, of the Eddas and of the Sagas, differs from the language we can call Proto-Norse, which was the language actually written in Elder Futhark. I'm going to show you a few texts converted into Proto-Norse, the language of the Elder Futhark, from Old Norse, including a stanza from Hávamál, the poem of Odin's wisdom, so that you can get a sense of just how different they are and of why you may have had so much trouble writing Old Norse in the Elder Futhark. So I think part of where people get caught up here is that Old and Proto both sound old, right? But the past has passed, and Proto is a preceding stage to Old. We talk about Old Norse beginning at about 700. We talk about Proto-Norse before that, going back to perhaps 200, 300, something like that. Now, one of the things that you will no doubt notice if you've studied Old Norse, maybe with the help of my Old Norse lesson videos, maybe with the help of Fawkes and Barnes' new introduction to Old Norse, is that words tend to be about twice as long in Proto-Norse as they are in Old Norse. And what's happened in the transition from Proto-Norse to Old Norse is that unstressed syllables have typically dropped. But when they drop, they often leave effects on the stressed vowels that are left. These effects of one vowel upon another are called umlaut phenomena, or vowel mutation phenomena, if you want to be a little bit more careful to distinguish it from something people can confuse for you just talking about those two dots in German. Those two dots in German are not technically what we call umlaut. In fact, technically what those two dots mark is that the vowel in question has been umlauted. But because people think of the two dots, I do often prefer to say just mutation. But call it umlaut or mutation. What's often happened is that some unstressed vowel has dropped, going from Proto-Norse to Old Norse, and the stressed vowel has often been mutated to be closer to the quality of the vowel that dropped behind it. This is what's responsible, for example, in English, when you have man but plural men. So the original plural and Proto-Germanic, the ancestry of English and Norse, a stage just a little bit back from Proto-Norse, the plural would be manes, but that I has actually mutated the preceding a, making it closer in the mouth to the I, making it an E. Then, since the plural is already sufficiently marked by the vowel change in the first syllable, the proto-language drops that second syllable because it's a redundant plural marker. You've already got the information in the first syllable. Why have more syllables if you don't need them? So, very often that exact thing is what's going to distinguish Proto-Norse from Old Norse most distinctively. Now, if you've looked at Old Norse, you know that learning tables for all the endings of nouns, verbs, and everything else is a big deal. Let's look at what those tables look like when we compare Proto-Norse to Old Norse. Let's use the word stone to get a good example of a noun. In Proto-Norse, we would expect this pattern to go something like this. Steinas, steina, steinas, steinai, steinos, steinan, steino, steinops. In Old Norse, that becomes stein. So here what we've got is that Z that marks the nominative singular in Proto-Norse is going to become an R by Old Norse. But what's going to happen first is the A in that second syllable is going to drop. That's going to put the Z right up against the root, stein. When that Z borders an N, an L, an S, or an R, it becomes the same thing. So here it's actually become just another N in Old Norse. But since it's still descended from a nominative marker, it drops in the accusative the next case, where we've just got stain in Old Norse. And by the way, what's happened to the diphthong, the vowel in the root, is that I has actually umlauted the A next to it into an E, so stein, the stain. Now, of course, Old Norse is going to drop any short vowel in an unstressed syllable unless it's protected by a following M or N, or unless it's long at the Proto-Norse stage. So we're going to go from steinar to stein. Steinos to steins, again losing unstressed syllables. Steinai to steini. Steinos to steinar. Unstressed long O is going to become an A unless it's nasalized or followed by an M. So steinar is the normal result there. Steinon to steina. So we've still got that final unstressed vowel in Old Norse because it's protected by the N that was there in Proto-Norse, but the N has dropped. Steino to steina. There we've got the long vowel that is protected from dropping, but it becomes short in Old Norse, and long O unstressed becomes short A if it's preserved at all. And then steinoms to steinum, final Z dropping. Probably what's happened is that dative plural vowel has been assimilated to the U stems for one reason or another in all of the other paradigms in Old Norse. Then, of course, this gets all the simpler when you go to the modern continental Scandinavian languages. Modern Icelandic doesn't look very different from this at all. But if you look at just modern Swedish, that's of course singular stein and plural steinar, and then you can add an S in either case to make it genitive or possessive, in either number to make it genitive or possessive, so stein, steinars. Pretty dang simple now. Let's look at a sample verb about to judge. That would be döma in Old Norse, but in Proto-Norse, domjan. What's happened is that the J causes umlaut as well. J causes an O to come further forward in the mouth toward a J or an I, making it U instead. Notice that in modern Icelandic this vowel has continued to mutate. In modern Icelandic this is now I, daima. Then we're going to have endings in the present, domju, domis, domið, domium, domið, domjan. Now the first person singular in Old Norse is then dömi. That's not what we would regularly expect from domju. Probably it has been analogized to the second and third persons. Domis to dömir is exactly what we expect. That Z is going to become an R in Old Norse. And we're going to have the umlaut change as mentioned before. And then long vowels and unstressed syllables are going to become short in Old Norse. What's happened in the third person singular is actually that it's been assimilated in Old Norse to the old second person singular. So this is dömir by analogy with the second person rather than what we would expect, which would be dömið. Now in very early inscriptions that are transitional between Proto-Norse and Old Norse in about the 600s, we actually see both sides of this change. For example, in the Steintoften stone, probably from right around 600, we have brutith, breaks. That would be Old Norse brytur. But we see the next stage in the change in the Björkatorp stone from just a little bit later, where we read bruts, which precedes the Z so doesn't turn into an R. That could even be bryts with the mutated vowel, since Elder Futhark doesn't have letters for writing these mutated umlauted vowels, like Y, which I'll show you an example of in a minute. Then domium, J is going to be lost after a long syllable unless the end of the root is velar, a K, or a G. So domum is what you'd expect, with the J still causing umlaut. Domith to dömið, which we would actually have expected to be the third person singular as well, as I mentioned before. And domjan to döma, again with the J being lost after a long syllable when it's not protected by a K or G. And the final N being dropped, which is another regular result of the transition from Proto-Norse to Old Norse. Past tense in Proto-Norse we'd expect domitho, domithes, domithe, domithum, domithud, domithun. That's going to become Old Norse dumtha. Later it'll actually be dumda, and then by modern Icelandic that's daimdi. There we've got the I mutation with the I dropping later, and that unstressed long O becoming a short A. Then unstressed long E is going to become a short I in Old Norse, and the Z's are going to become R's. By the way, the fact that most of the unstressed short I's that you see in Old Norse actually come from E's is the reason that most of the I's that are still in the language in unstressed syllables don't cause I mutation. So students have to learn where the I's used to be, not where the I's are now from the present tense perspective of Old Norse. Domithum, dumthum, domithuth, dumthuth, domithun, dumthu, pretty much as you would expect. And then again, by modern Swedish, this is so much easier because you just have one present tense form, dömer, and then one past tense form, dömde, for all the persons. So over time, I mean, actually, in a sense, there's less daylight between modern Swedish and Old Norse than there is between Old Norse and Proto-Norse. I mean, the length of words is much more similar, say, in Old Norse to modern Swedish or Norwegian, and you don't have these massive sets of endings with multiple syllables that you do in Proto-Norse. Now, if we look at some characteristic Proto-Norse inscriptions, we can see just how distinct this language is from Old Norse. If we look at the Einang inscription from Norway, we got Dagastis Runo Faihitho. That means somebody whose name ends in gastis, meaning guest, painted runes. And probably the word eka, I, was in here somewhere because the verb is first person. Now, this would be in Old Norse something gestar, runar, foda, or later even runir foda. What's happened is you got I umlaut in the word guest, so from gastis to gestar, with the I mutating the A into an E, and then the I dropping, and then that Z turning into an R. In runo, it's not actually necessarily what we'd expect for the accusative plural in Old Norse. This may be a dialect, or Proto-Norse, this may be a dialectal thing you'd expect, actually runos, which is what the form runar comes from. Again, unstressed short O becomes an A, Z's become R's. In Faihitho, we have Eich, A-I-H, always becomes long A in Old Norse. That I is going to drop, and then the O is going to become unstressed A, as mentioned before. So, foda. Now, in modern Icelandic, that'd be something gestur, runir, foði, or fáði, excuse me. So you can see Icelandic has continued to change, although less dramatically than the continental Scandinavian languages. Let's look at another one on Ystaby. We've got afts, hariwolfa, hadu wolfs, haero wolfis, right runas thayas. In Old Norse, I would give that as aft herjolvi. So there we've got I umlaut on the first element of the name. So Hari wolf would be like army wolf. The Old Norse name is Herjolf. So what you've got is I umlaut with the I then dropping that causes the A to mutate into E. And then, oh no, actually the I stays, but it just stays as a J. And then W's always drop before U's and O's in Old Norse. And the dative singular, this is a dialect thing, is sometimes A in Proto-Norse, but it's I in Old Norse. Hadawulfs, again, here actually we're going to have U umlaut or U mutation. U mutates an A into a hook O, Hod, and then drops. W disappears before U. By the way, this is reason for Odin versus Woden, word versus Orth, wolf versus Ulver, worm versus Ormer. And then the Z's become R. And then presumably this Haira wolf is the genitive singular, so that's son of sword wolf, Haira wolf. Already here we would expect Heru, actually, in Proto-Norse. The Haer probably means that some kind of breaking is already happening. Breaking is the process in Old Norse that turns an old E into J hook O before a following U. So in Old Norse that Herus become Hjor, and then Ulfs instead of Wolfies. And then right, this is cognate with English wrote. English wrote came from a protoform exactly like this. That verb to write or carve is actually lost in Old Norse. The closest thing from a similar root would be reist. And then runas, this has already had the O change into A in that unstressed syllable. We'd expect runar in Old Norse, thayas, thar. So this is after Herjolf, in memory of Herjolf. Holdover, son of Hjorolf, carved those runes. Now, in the next little bit here, I'm going to give you a stanza from Hávamál, one of the most popular and well-known poems in Old Norse, the poem of Odin's wisdom, in Old Norse, and then I'm going to give it to you in Proto-Norse, so that you can actually see what this stanza would have looked like at the time that it would have gotten carved in Elder rather than Younger Futhark. All right, so the most famous stanza, and probably the most famous poem in Old Norse, Hávamál, is stanza 77. Dyr fe, döja fränder, dör själver it sama. Ek vet ein att aldrig dör, domer dödan hvern. So, a cow dies, kinsmen die, the self dies the same. I know one that never dies, judgment on each one dead. That's a pretty literal translation. For a more polished translation, of course, you can see Wanderer's Hávamál. Now, this is an action of reconstruction. This isn't preserved in Proto-Norse anywhere, but what I would expect that to be in Proto-Norse is something like this. Daujid fehu, daujan friondis, daujid selvas samo, eka white einano, thatane aldraigin daujid, domas umbi daudano Warriano. Now again, notice that the words are basically twice as long. You have no umlaut phenomena, so the vowels EY in the root syllable of die, dui in Old Norse, those would go back to a dao, and then the conditioning vowel, the thing that made them aud ui, that I is still there. The third person singular ending has not yet assimilated from that ev to r, so you'd still have dao yiv, not dao yis or dao yir or something like that. And you would still have ek, not eka, which we see in early Proto-Norse inscriptions. You would have just longer words all around. The accusative masculine singular ending used to be ano, not just on or simply in. One of the noticeable things too is I've left out the article it, the, in line 3 in Old Norse and the Proto-Norse, because Proto-Norse does not have any apparent article or word the. So that's an exercise in reconstruction. It's possible that I could do all of Hávamál that way. That was pretty off the cuff, but I'm not sure why one would do that. But it demonstrates that there is a form of these stanzas that you could put in something that actually Elder Futhark could easily write. Right? Elder Futhark has a letter for each one of the sounds in that Proto-Norse reconstructed Hávamál stanza 77. Now, if you look at the Old Norse text, you really can't write that in Elder Futhark. Right? There's vowels there that there's no Elder Futhark letter for. Right? There's no Elder Futhark letter for Y. You could write it in U, and that may in fact be what it is in that earlier inscription I mentioned with the word bruts. It could be bruts. But we don't know that that's what an Elder Futhark adept would want to write that sound with, because when Elder Futhark was designed, that sound wasn't in the language. There's just no match between the language and the script. The script was designed and went out of use before all of these sound changes happened in Old Norse. And by the time the sound changes happened, they were writing in Younger Futhark. In fact, Younger Futhark slightly leads or precedes the transition from Proto-Norse to Old Norse by just a little bit. So they really never developed a way to have Elder Futhark kind of keep up with these new sounds. Now, Younger Futhark doesn't exactly either, but in Younger Futhark at least there's rules for which vowels you write with which letters, right? So the same vowel rune, ur, is used for U and O and Y and Ö. It's kind of chaotic. It's too much for one vowel letter to do, but it's what the system is. Elder Futhark has no such system for those vowels. And then, of course, there's differences in allophones from Proto-Norse to Old Norse. And what that means, an allophone is a distinct sound, but that's felt to be, by speakers, a kind of the same sound. So in modern English, we actually have two different TH sounds, right? We have thin, the voiceless sound, and then, the voice sound. But we just think of them as the TH sound, and we never consider them as different. In the same way, in Old Norse, that then sound is considered a form of the th sound, like it is in modern English. And so in Younger Futhark, they're both written with the thorn rune. In Proto-Norse, actually, that then sound was regarded as a form of D, as it would be actually again much later in Old Norse. And so Eds are written with the D rune rather than the Thorn rune as they would be in Younger Futhark. So there's a huge amount, just a kaleidoscope of different factors that go into why you can't really write Old Norse in Elder Futhark, and why you need pretty specialized knowledge to even try to write it in Younger Futhark, or to try to write an original text like this that I've done here in Elder Futhark and Proto-Norse. But it's all part of this sort of shifting kaleidoscope of language and history, which is complicated a long way back. You know, we have this notion that the past is simple, and that language in the past was sort of a simpler matter, and that there's some sort of just, you know, knock you on the head simplicity about the language of someone like a speaker of Proto-Germanic. But in fact, it's very complex, very sophisticated, and it was going to change a lot before we ever got to anything that we could call the Viking Age. Well, folks, I hope that has been a useful, informative video for you. And from the most beautiful place in the world, there are many, but they're all in the Rockies. Grand Teton National Park in beautiful Wyoming. I'm wishing you all the best.